Hello and welcome. My name is Helen Newman. I am going to be the chair for this webinar. Before commencing with my introduction of our speaker today, I would like to thank our 5 sponsors: Atkins, Faithful and Gould, IES, MPS Group and Wilmot Dixon for their support. Thank you for that. All the webinars over the next 2-week period are being recorded and will be loaded onto Space's YouTube channel. Delegates and Spaces member will be sent a link at the end of the conference. The recordings are only available to delegates and Spaces members. And if you have any questions, please include them in the chat box and we'll try and answer them towards the end. So this morning's webinar is called Enabling the Delivery of Xerocarbon and will be presented by Professor Alan Jones, RIBA President and Professor of Architecture at Queen's University. Alan has been designing and delivering innovative low-energy buildings throughout his career. Notable buildings that you may know have been the HQ for England and Cricket Board and the Inland Revenue HQ building. Today, Alan will be focusing on enabling zero-carbon projects. So, Alan, welcome and thank you for supporting the Spaces 2021 conference.
Thank you and hello. And I'm pleased to say my presentation is up. I'd like to actually, first of all, thank Helen for the invitation. I always like to say yes when possible, as opposed to saying no, and to use events like this to explore ideas that have been sort of, if you like, are lurking in my head, but also I've been exploring in my columns and in the Royal Institute of British Architects Journal, the RIBA Journal, and also trying to push things along a bit as well. So it's a new presentation, so if it's a little bit bumpy in places, please excuse me, but I think it's better that than just delivering something that off pat that's sort of and corporate. So you can probably tell from my accent that I'm from Northern Ireland, but I'm sitting here in Northern Ireland. I feel as if I've been, other than a few small, quick, short trips to England, back to the RIBA, I've been here since March of last year, since COVID, and the pandemic. Every time I speak, I put a slide up like this to, if you like, promote Northern Ireland. I've added in speaking from Northern Ireland, UK, to address Macron's comments over the weekend. No, we haven't drifted further away from the UK or anything like that. We're still firmly, although there is obviously that disputed piece of water between us. It is the home of the Titanic, as we would say. It was all right when it left us. The Game of Thrones, quite a number of scenes have been filmed there, or here, I should say. It's a location of great landscape, of towns and cities, industry and history, and strong accents. So I will speak slowly and clearly. And you may find more than usual, actually what I'm saying is on the screen. Again, that's to help everybody, if you like, understand me and what I'm trying to say. So, I see my role this morning as a provocateur to challenge and hopefully inspire and motivate you for this second week of the conference. And so that when you go back into your workplace and engage with your projects and your colleagues, I'd like to think that I've at least made you think a little differently. And I had to do some research. Spaces, or the Spaces, is a collaborative organisation. That's what it says on your website. For those in the building professions working in and for the public sector, and is committed to assisting its members in achieving the highest possible standards in the development, design, construction, and management of the public sector estate for the mutual benefit of their employers. And it made me wonder, if we just focus on this, for the mutual benefit of their employers, I would actually argue, or suggest, I should say, I wouldn't argue with anyone, suggest, who are we developing, designing, constructing and managing for, and to benefit who? Yes, your employers, because they're obviously who you work for. But actually, I would argue we have as big, if not a bigger responsibility towards your children, our children, grandchildren, our communities and country, for society and for the world and for our collective future. So yes, we have a duty to those that we work for, but I think there's also a bigger duty that we have to consider as well. So we know the problem, and I'm sure you've had over the first week of the conference lots of statistics and different ways of defining the problem. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to suggest that we know what the problem is in terms of tons of CO2, how much the contribution of buildings and construction is, and then we add in the transport to and from home and the workplace, and business and so on, and factories, and how the earth can absorb a certain amount of CO2, but not enough. We're producing too much. Deforestation, again, global the size of the UK every year. We know about temperature increases, and I'll linger longer on this slide in that I think there's another problem, which is, I've referred to it here as just do it, where we, as an industry and as individuals, we're under time pressure. We're under, well, that's what we did last time. Can we just do that again? Just do it. Just get on with it. And I think that is part of the problem, or an aspect or facet of the problems that we're facing, is just that sort of audit. We're tight for time. We're tight for money. And just do it. And I think that's something that we have to try and consider and address. And again, I'm not going to get focused in on lots of the answers that we already know. We know many of the answers too, in terms of, for example, that we know what we have to do in terms of low-bodied carbon, low operational energy, low water use, be as local as we can, combine the projects that we're doing with low-carbon travel, maximizing phenomena that we find in nature in terms of light and natural ventilation, and it's a collaborative team effort and so on. Yes, we understand that. But what I'm going to focus on is on the enabling aspect of all of this, in that we know what we have to do, but how do we enable the delivery of net zero carbon? And I suppose remembering about that slide and just do it, what was the focus of a project? And if we think of, and I know the whole idea of sustainable design and ecology and all of that was for many years was seen as sort of freaky. You wore Moses sandals and sort of hemp shirts and let your hair grow long and all of that. It had a sort of very much a sort of fringe aspect to it, and one would argue not anymore. Again, if we think of our construction projects, what was the focus of a project previously? That proverbial project management triangle of time, quality, and cost. But I think the focus is in our new world. I'm suggesting that the focus is changing. What is the focus of a project? And I think there's certain, we talk about the connected up government, or some might argue the lack of connected up government. But if we start to look at, say, for example, I've focused here on the green paper that came out at the end of last year, transforming public procurement. And if we start to look at that, what we used to do, I would argue, with projects was look at the initial cost, and that was the obsession. And there's evidence that has changed. So the huge, for example, here, quoting out of the Transforming Public Procurement document, the huge power of some 290 billion of public money spent through public procurement every year in the UK must support priorities. So you just sort of think of, what is it we're trying, what's the focus of a project? It's no longer initial cost. It's now moving firmly towards whole life cost, our whole life carbon assessment, realizing government priorities, In the Transforming Public Procurement, it talks about helping our communities recover from COVID pandemic, tackle climate change. So it is about really focusing on what are the big issues. And it talks about how those priorities should then find their way through the business case for programs and projects, or that terrible term, everything now is an asset, and through to procurement specifications and the assessment of quality when awarding contracts. So there's that, and as I've suggested in the bottom right, the connected wicked problems, in that a wicked problem is where it's not, if it was an easy problem to solve, there would be one answer. But when you actually have a sort of ecosystem of interconnected issues and so on, that's what we refer to as a wicked problem that's actually needing, if you like, a combination of strategies to address it. So again, the paper goes on to talk about it mentions the new Construction Playbook, which also came out at the end of last year, which I haven't referred to in any detail here, but I think it's obviously very, very relevant to enabling the delivery of net zero carbon. And it looks at policies to support innovation in construction, such as setting clear and appropriate outcome-based specifications. In my day working for Hopkins, it was very much about performance specifications. Think performance, think outcome, more sophisticated evaluations of quality in terms of wider public policy delivery. We're back to what is government trying to do, and whole life value, which I think is fantastic to read. And obviously, are they just words and aspirations, or will it actually be delivered? But just doing some more research on this before speaking today. Look at I didn't know, and again, I'm just an architect, jack of all trades and master of none. And obviously, in the audience, we'll have people who are specialists in procurement and delivery and so on. So we now have something called a should cost model guidance note that actually came out in just last month, which again starts to articulate this change in procurement, which I think is essential to the delivery of net zero carbon, because we can have as many skills and techniques and so on in terms of design and delivery, but unless I firmly believe, unless we have the framework right, and I would emphasize this point to government any chance I get, is that government needs to take the lead, and obviously organisations like the spaces can actually lobby along with the likes of the construction CIC, for example, and the CLC, and actually creating the right context into which we can then deliver on net zero carbon. So they also, again, just on the green paper, it refers to the government wants to send a clear message that commercial teams, again, they're obviously referring to the public sector, do not have to select the cheapest bid, and that they can design evaluation criteria to include wider economic, social, or I should say, and environmental benefits, not 1, 2, or 3. It should be all of those. So it's not the cheapest, wider economic, social, environmental benefits, and so on. So this, I think, is a change. We need to, I would argue, remind our colleagues and whoever is making those major decisions about projects that this is the direction of travel. This is what the government is asking. And I appreciate that we have, in the audience, we have people from overseas, i.e. not the UK. We have people from Scotland. And apologies for mentioning what's written in England in terms of, but it gives a direction of travel. And I appreciate within Scotland, for example, that there are some very good examples of leading by example in terms of local authorities and the Scottish government. I believe the priorities are changing in that it's this idea of society, if you like, following what government suggests and so on. I think there's, as I suggest here, who is leading who, Is it from the top down, which is a sort of government-led, or is it bottom up? And does society follow, or does society begin to dictate? So we have protests, for example, here. Thousands of young people gather in Parliament Square in central London to protest against the government's lack of action on climate change. That was February 2019. And you sort of, so that there is this sort of bottom up as well. So there's a sort of, there's an increasing expectation from, let's call it consumers, from taxpayers, as to how we actually, what projects we're doing, what is there, and we, through social media and so on, we're calling out, or we're being called out when things aren't done the way that, if you like, people think they should be. So priorities to me are definitely changing. And so, as I suggest, the world cannot wait. And it is about, as I say, bottom right, doing the right thing right. So I think we focused before on doing the thing right, but I think there's a move now towards doing the right thing right. And to build on what in the previous slide, is it who is starting to dictate or lead? Is it employees and employers? Is it the students or the universities and schools themselves? Is it capitalism or is it ethical business? And you know, so it's an issue around choices and who chooses what for which reasons. And so there's a lot more introspection, a lot more sort of questioning about why things are happening as they are, why things aren't happening faster, and so on. I think that's very much the sort of context for government, context for the delivery of projects. So how can we start to enable delivery? So focusing on the enabling. And so I'm suggesting that that we linger longer at the beginning of a project. Apologies for the alert there. So you know, the early decisions are the most strategic and have the most impact. What are the choices that we can have? What are the options in terms of user consultation? But I think we have to be careful about user consultation. I think it was Steve Jobs that suggested, you know, why would you ask people what they want? By the time you've developed it and got it to market, actually what they want will have changed. So user consultation, I'm not suggesting not do it. I don't want to be quoted in the social media as not suggesting that, but it's got to be, if it's part of the bigger mix. And that early part of a project, I describe it to my clients as the dreams and sums stage, where you're trying to blend aspirations and sums. But I've added in, again, for sort of larger public projects, I think it's about also setting performance. And once that performance is actually set, it's actually then following it through. Lingering longer can involve, for example, RIBA client advisors. It could involve project champions. It could involve workshops. It could be a competition. But I think it's really important to actually invest time and effort in the early stages of a project, because each project, as we know, is an enormous investment of effort and time, and obviously of energy, and an investment of carbon. So it's Fred Olson, when he was asked, he was one of Norman Foster's sort of early clients, and Fred Olson was asked about Norman Foster, and Fred Olson said that what was great about Norman Foster was that he asked the right questions. And I think that's really important, is to sort of take that time. And I appreciate that very often, my experience of Northern Ireland, for example, is you know, that whole front end of a project gets completely squeezed, and it's just literally, it's budgetary. We've got to spend the money by this amount of time, and go. And we lose this important stage. Top left of the slide, Pierre Vassanar, in Defining Contemporary Professionalism, a book that I co-authored with Rob Hyde from Manchester. In his section, we asked him to look at lingering longer. He is an architect with an MBA in briefing and the early stages of a project. And he explains that there's nothing wrong with getting a brief right. Just don't expect it to stay right for very long. And his advice in his section was brief the building, brief the project for it to be easy to do new things in or easy to dismantle. So I'm thinking of Victorian warehouses and sort of large spaces that can be actually adjusted and used in different ways through the life of the building. And he also cites, Pierre Vasselard cites, if you look at 1960s and 1970s office buildings where they've got the brief that tight, they've got the floor-to-floor height that tight and that optimal, that the buildings become unusable for later in their life, so that they have to be demolished, or their use is severely limited. So linger longer would be one strategy in terms of enabling. Another is, I've suggested to Chris, if you look at top left there, in a conversation with Chris Pincher, who's the current housing minister with the MHCLG, he, in a conversation with me, one of our meetings, he talks about fabric first, technology second, and I actually sort of said, well, no, actually, I believe that's wrong. Maybe I didn't put it quite as bluntly as that, but actually, to me, form first, getting it in. Well, before that, I would argue, do we need a building at all? Do we could we refurbish? Could we retrofit and so on? So before we even get into whether it's a new building or not, I think we have to do that sort of appraisal. But looking at if we had a greenfield site, it's form first, then fabric, then technology. So form first, the idea of volume, surface area, orientation, the spaces between, for example, to allow people to play safely, to allow for sunlight penetration in the wintertime, connections to and with the surroundings, where the entrances are, all of that sort of big picture, what I would describe 1 to 500 type decisions as in scale that you're working at. Then we would move to fabric second, the location of openings, the material, the extent of insulation, etc., etc. And then technology third, where we then have, as I suggest here, essentials and then gizmos. So I must have been saying the right things, because Chris Pincher has asked to meet me again, and I think that's later this month. So it's fabric, form first, fabric second, technology third, and we're back to that, getting those initial decisions right. In one of my RIBA journal articles, I referred to redlineism, where we literally are given a site, an OS, a map, or even it might be a Google Earth or something like that, that just image with a red line. We own this, focus on that. But actually, how we the lingering longer and actually thinking of how it all connects into the context, or getting the orientation right, using evidence and modeling and so on to actually get the form right before we move into fabric and so on. And the difficulty is that the further down that sort of hierarchy, that if you imagine trying to use technology to address problems with the form and the orientation, you're on, as we would say, a hiding to nothing. It's very, very difficult to do that. So an illustration of what I've been talking about is the Sterling Prize winning Goldsmith Street housing project. I was on the judging panel for this. This is the RIBA Sterling Prize for the best project. This is for 2019. And I used it as an example for Chris Pincher of getting the space between the blocks correct, to allow the sun into the spaces, to allow for safe play areas, the connections in terms of the rest of the context, and then moving towards fabric and then the technology as a final element of the design solution. So And it's the number of times that we've been using this project, for example, within the RIBA as a sort of reference point, the number of people that have seen it. This was in, this project ended up in the Sun newspaper as an illustration of how to do things well. So moving on. So I believe another strategy and I suppose a lot of them, these are all sort of linked to lingering longer, getting it right at the start, building performance evaluation. And if we go to top left, what is BPE? Again, Fionn Stevenson for the book Defining Contemporary Professionalism, she describes it as BPE is the systematic evaluation of all aspects of building performance, providing feedback during all stages of the plan of work, as in from 0 to 7, from inception through to occupation. This includes the essential consideration of post-occupancy evaluation of performance after occupation as part of the process. So it's setting the performance at the start, and I've been there in terms of projects where we can have aspirations at the start of a project in terms of performance, but through let's call it unknowns, soil conditions or something appears, or there's a change or whatever that other aspects, especially project aspects later on in the project, get compromised. But it's actually how do we follow those performance goals, setting them at the start, and then monitoring that those performances are going to be maintained all the way through the project as it moves through the planning process, as it moves through in terms of detailed design, getting ready for construction, and as it is constructed, and not letting it get compromised. And I didn't want to put it in a slide, but just to sort of imagine if we moved to a situation where design teams are not appointed on the basis of their appointment isn't based on cost of the project, but it's actually based on performance. And I think that's something as an industry that we should consider doing, is moving away, from the model that we've had for years. I know you could argue it's a difficult one, but how do we move towards a system where people are and companies and consortia are appointed on the basis of the project's outcomes, benefits, and gains for everybody, rather than actually what it is. And I suppose I will be talking about that later, but it is really, I think we have to flip the focus towards performance, away from what it is to what it does. And I suppose that leads into this slide very nicely. And some of the work, a lot of the work that I've been doing at the RIBA over the last 2 years has been about this reorientation of the construction industry, and obviously focusing particularly on the RIBA and architects and our institute, that I firmly believe that there's a new relationship between our industry and the profession, the related professions, with society and users, that it is towards an outcome-driven brief, focusing on gains, benefits and outcomes, realising public policy through the projects, where projects are based on evidence, research and data, rather than I want, I like, or whatever, towards performance specification and longer term value. That's, if you like, what it's referred to as the social contract, the idea of what is it we're trying to achieve as an industry. So it's a move away, I'm arguing, from what it is, whether that is a school or a hospital or a whatever, that it's actually what it actually achieves and what it does. So if we focus on the outcomes and what it actually, it allows people to get better. How much better? How faster? It's a place for children to learn and to grow. How does that then change how we think about the project? So it's not projects, not as a thing or an object, but what it allows to happen, what it facilitates, how it improves lives, how it performs, and what outcomes come from the project. New isn't always the answer, and retrofit should be the first option. That the answer isn't always a building. It might be I've lost projects. One, not a public project, it was a large golf club. And we actually proved that actually you could satisfy the brief by actually reconfiguring the internals of the existing building. And we lost because the captain of the golf club wanted a new building that he could put his name on. And so we put forward what we thought was the optimum solution. Another one that a practice in London, where the school was having difficulty and wanted to it was an old school building, and where the corridors were too full and it just wasn't working and so on. So they wanted to build an extension, use up some of the playground and so on, and compromise the playground. And one practice came up with a solution, which was actually to involve a sort of traffic, sort of pedestrian flow engineer. And they came up with redesigning the bell system so that they phased the bells across the third floor, second floor, et cetera, et cetera. They lost. So I think it's opening up people's ideas as to what was it we're trying to do, and what would be, if you mean the lightest touch possible in terms of resources, carbon, etc. So I'm suggesting, as a way of illustration, I appreciate this is not a public building in terms of the client, but it is obviously very public in terms of where it is. So I'm suggesting that there is a new order that we need to, and a new sensibility that's clearly developing, that we need to sort of help people understand the sort of connectedness of issues and how things can come together very well. So I wrote about this project in my piece, actually, for the RIBA journal, Doing the Right Thing Right. And if we look at, it's a different approach. So this project was actually taller and larger than the design guidance for that part of Westminster and London had suggested was possible. It was, but how that all came about was that they had a high quality ground floor public realm, and the building itself was going to be robust and long life. So instead of in commercial buildings where they're designed to last, let's say 50 years, then you have a period of about 3 years where they've demolished the building, reconstructed it to new environmental and constructional and spatial standards, and they do that over a number of cycles. This building was designed to be more loose fit, higher quality, with the view that it actually lasted for 150 years. And that meant that it was robust, long life. It had high thermal, exposed high thermal mass, which reduced the cooling load, which is not only just attractive in terms of running costs, but it also attracted blue chip tenants who wish to be seen by their investors and employees to be doing the right thing. So there's this idea of the identity of the and aspirations of an organization, and how does that then match the physicality of the environment in which they choose to be in, so that if you're trying to attract certain people to come and work for you, that you need to be in the right place, both ethically and physically. So being globally aware, ethical and considerate, and at the same time delivering a more robust, long life, low energy building. So that's how it's all connected up. And if I give you a little bit more detail on it, so the client wins. In this case, a bigger, longer life building, no rental breaks due to reconstruction. It's a highly attractive, easily rentable asset that term again, that tenants were outbidding each other to secure it for 20 years. So it was seen as really, really popular. You have blue chip companies, if you like, trying to scrabble over each other to get into this building. That the planning authority and the city wins with a high quality public realm, and with a robust, determined, high quality accommodation above it. And then the user, the tenant, wins because it is reflects their ethics and it's attractive to their investors, their board, and their employees. Everybody wins. But it's a different sensibility, a different way of thinking of things. So to sort of conclude, and you can see I've tried to stay away from lots of, X per square meter and so on, because I think really there are better, more expert people in the room than me on that side of things. But I think what we need to do is sort of, if we need to get the strategies right for projects and the context for them, you may wish to download any one of these: the RIBA Sustainable Outcomes Guide, the Climate Challenge, the Plan of Work Overview, and the Plan for Use Guide. Those are all free on the RIBA website, architecture.com. And if we take one of the publications, if we think of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we start to think of which ones are then applicable to construction projects and a built environment, and those then have bin mapped by the RIBA, obviously working closely with a lot of architects and other consultants. So you can see how the goals connect back into, and as I say, you can download these and you can use them as the guide. They move to good health and well-being, sustainable water cycle, new zero carbon emissions, sustainable life cycle costs, connectivity and transport, social value, emissions again, net zero whole life carbon emissions, sustainable water cycle, and sustainable land use and ecology. So that there's a bit of overlap between them, but you can sort of see how we've taken those, the sustainable development goals, and applied them across into our sustainable outcomes. And when we say here, how do we deliver? That's the whole project team, client, contractor, designers, consultants, funders, all together. It is a sort of a virtuous circle of operational energy use, embodied carbon, water, transport, land use, well-being, social value, life cycle costs, and so on. It's all together. So again, you can download the plan of work, and you can see we have a sustainable overlay, and you can see how that actually starts to all the way through from the linger longer section that I was referring to here. If we get this right, it makes all of this easier. So, and that loop then comes back, if we go right through to use, and we then do our POE, how that then feeds back into the projects. And again, when it comes to selecting teams, you would like to be looking at teams that actually are working in this way to actually learn from their projects. I'm conscious of time. And again, just for the sake of for those that want to linger longer at this section of the presentation, I'm going to go over it very quickly. But just what is the industry guidance for new developments in terms of zero carbon, just to sort of get those on the map, and then a little bit of clipping on that. But there's our you can look at those at your leisure. But in terms of what are the different elements of actually trying to deliver on enabling the delivery of net zero carbon. Again, I'm just going to, what is your, you're probably sick of slides like that in terms of assessing operational energy. Again, thank you to Gary Clark, who chairs our Sustainable Futures Committee, for these slides. So my final slide to you is actually to the public sector. I urge you to lead on this, because I firmly believe that the private sector normally follows the public sector. So we need leadership from the public sector and systems that get set in place, then, if you like, work their way down into the rest of the industry. So thank you very much indeed.
Alan, thank you for that. That was great. I've been keeping an eye on the questions that have been coming through, and I think there's a few that are kind of referring to your wicked problem in a way, the kind of knotty problems that come along. So I think Greg Keeling was just mentioning really how pertinent the linger longer strategy is. And how often government projects are often constrained by the financial grant deadline, so pushing projects for rush. But it's just one of those wicked problems, I guess, that's, how we untangle.
Well, somebody has to. I would argue somebody has to speak to the those in charge of that element of the. Well, not speak to that. Sorry. That's what I would like to do, but what I realise has to happen is we have to actually set out what's the difference between working how we work at the moment and as Greg was pointing out, just this somebody presses the button and expects it to be there in 18 months' time. We could do it that way, and what happens? But if we actually gave another 6 months, and it's not to just sort of like, if you like, put our feet up and not actually do anything, but actually, the impact of those extra 3 months or 6 months at the start of a project could really, really make the building much more usable, much more of a better asset, to use that term again. So I think there has to be mechanisms found to explain the difference that could happen, and then and again, I think from looking at the procurement, the green paper on procurement is actually connecting it back to government policies. If you want us to deliver on government policies, you need to find ways of giving us a little bit more time to do that, because then we can deliver. We can deliver for society, we can deliver for government, we can deliver for the world.
Yeah. Well, Philip Jordan has also put another one of those wicked problems forward, highlighting issues such as materials shortage from imports or UK-made materials, trade skills, and training skills. But I guess it's all part of that kind of whole kind of thinking it holistically and how we kind of deal with those. It's just another wicked problem in a way, isn't it?
Well, but I think we have to be careful that we have to find mechanisms to actually address wicked problems that we could, some people will just say, oh, that's too difficult to actually sort out. But actually, we need to be looking at materials. I think just even on materials, I think we need to be thinking much more. We seem to have a resistance to using timber a lot more than we should be doing. I think we have to move towards it. But again, people would argue, everybody can argue why certain materials are more sustainable than others, or as sustainable as others. Trade skills, I think, are really important because, again, a lot of what we're talking about here is about accuracy. Again, we look at the Construction Playbook, we look at all the work that Mark Farmer is doing through CAST and how he's advising government on modern construction methods. I think that's so it's but it's a wicked problem, but it's the industry we're in, and we need to work hard at finding ways around them.
Richard Daniels was putting in his question really about kind of considering human scale, which is really appropriate, obviously, in terms of the kind of wider context of things. Just pointing out, Athens has a 3-story limit on buildings, for example. I think also later he was talking about deep plan office buildings and kind of retrofitting them. But there's some pretty interesting examples of how they're getting reconsidered and reinvented, really.
Yes. Well, again, that reorientation that I was referring to of the profession and the industry is towards people, the impact, and let's talk about spatial and environmental equality. That we're too focused on the object and not on the impact of people, and that can be both negative but also it could be positive. If we were to start to think of what a project that's well designed, well built, well considered, right at the start, can have on a community and also on individuals, I think should be the normal. And that was the thing about Goldsmith Street when we were judging it. We were saying, but there was one. It shouldn't. If this was in Central Europe, it would not be that special. But the thing is, it's special because it's in England, and we were agreeing as we were judging. We would like to think in 10 years' time it wouldn't even win an RIBA award. It's just seen as, well, everybody does it that way now. But it's the fact that it's not. So we need to learn from other places and see how things can be done. And I think that's what's great about organisations like the Spaces, where people can share experience and share
absolutely
good ways of doing things. And do you know why we're doing it in Scotland? That's how we should be doing it down here, and so on. And that's really because in my most recent piece for the RIBA Journal, I was sort of talking about remembering Stephen Hall, and he wrote about, I don't know, let's call it the mire and the mud of everyday practice and everyday business in the industry. But it's only through engaging with that we actually deliver the higher ideals. And so we've got to keep our eye on the ideals and what we're actually striving for. We realize that we've got to get, if you like, roll our sleeves up, get our muddy boots on or whatever, and actually start to engage with all of this.
I think what's interesting is the kind of the judging and awarding of quality awards through the RIBA highlights those more humble examples that kind of deal with the knotty issues and deliver a way of raising its profile. And I think Spaces, we have our own kind of awards process for buildings and projects, which is that kind of process of making sure people know about those great examples that are maybe more humble than, let's say, the Lynch Architects case study, which obviously is really interesting, but maybe more humble examples are more relevant.
And yes, well, that Lynch project didn't win an RIBA award, by the way. No. So and a phrase that I'm hearing more often these days is what good ordinary. Just the idea of actually. I know we've got leading edge, and we look to the most innovative projects. But there's in terms of distribution, you've got what I have also referred to as the solid middle. That idea of actually was it even Mies van der Rohe who said, "I don't want to be famous, I want to be good." And can we, actually aspire to be good at what we do? And I know some people in the audience will go, "Yeah, that's architects for you. They want to be famous rather than good." But that's my message is about good ordinary. It's about focusing back on people and the impact on people and performance, not the thing, not the beautiful object. But it's actually that idea of, and again, when you think of all those diagram communities, good ordinary, there's a lot of what you just called urban fabric, and that include these days, office buildings and factories and workspaces and so on, where just get those right, and the architecture, if you like, those sort of jewels are the churches and the law courts and the libraries.
Yeah. So I've just noticed a few more comments that are coming through. Really just kind of Philip Jordan's just highlighting the fact that public sector is obviously going through considerable austerity. But I think it's a kind of highlighting those projects that actually have really done well with low budgets, or, it's the humble kind of more ordinary projects, I think, even can be raised and publicised. So Alan, have you lost audio?
No, I haven't. I'm here.
No, good. Okay, you just went very quiet.
No, can you see me okay?
No.
Oh, I don't know what's happened.
Just seeing if you've got any more questions.
Yeah, but just on that point about as you're looking for questions, just the idea of projects working to low budgets and so on. When you look at the early projects by Foster, Rogers, Hopkins, and so on. They were working with low budgets, and there's a sort of a nimbleness that you've got to apply when you're working. But if you're to squeeze the financial equation in every aspect, so if you want low budget, you've still got to keep the fees for your design team at the right level, because then they can work hard at meeting that budget. But if you screw down on the budget of the actual budget itself and then expect it to be done for peanuts as well, then you actually need to linger longer to actually work to lower budgets. But I think then the world wins when you're using less resources, less mass, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And keep the performance at the right levels. I think so. I'm a firm believer in humble. I do this cartoon of a city that that you've got the tall glass, you've got the cantilevered brick building, you've got the whatever. That doesn't make a city. You need, if you like, that good ordinary. Mm-hmm. As the background.
See if you've got any more questions. I think maybe we've kind of gone through quite a few of the questions.
So Helen, there's one from Roy McLean. Does technology in a post-COVID world significantly diminish the requirement for continually creating new assets? And thinking more about retrofit and how our skills should be developed and applied.
I missed the beginning of that, but it's something about technology and retrofit and post-COVID.
Technology in a post-COVID world.
Yeah, well, I think COVID has accelerated technology and how, if you like, it's used to just what we're doing right now in terms of how we operate. And I know technology can also mean about technology of buildings, but I just think there's going to be a lot of change to our cities and our towns, and the impact that will have on infrastructure. That we've got people saying, I will never fly again to actually deliver a talk. I will just do it all like this. Why would you move? An example of that was our Royal Gold Medal event that we ran at the RIBA, where it was all, it was a little bit of, if you like, in the room. There was about 4 people in the room and everything else was delivered digitally. And that has big changes, so that when you speak to people like, for example, Stuart Lipton, who's a sort of, if you like, a big name in the sort of property development business in London. And he says it's going to really change central business districts and how people, the amount of redundant office space that there's going to be. Well, not redundant. Office space that's going to be freed up for other things. So how does that then change what a central business district is in terms of its economy, in terms of how the space is used? What does that do for, I think I'm sure every government department is also looking at how more and more people will want to spend maybe 2 days a week working at home. What does that then do to layouts of existing buildings? How would we want to potentially downsize or reuse that space within those buildings? I think is very, makes it for a very interesting few years coming up.
Yeah, definitely. Do we keep going with questions, Fiona?
I think you've probably got time for one more.
I think it's an observation from Roy McLean about the stage 0 strategic definition and what traditional definition of client requirements and business case needs to be redefined post-COVID and IT, he says. But I think that's just linking into what you're saying about, lingering longer at the early start of a project and making sure, you're considering the holistic performance requirements.
Yeah, but again, I would encourage anyone looking at a project to, you take, for example, a school. What does our a hospital. How has what has happened over the last 18 months, how is that going to change how a school would operate, or a hospital would operate, or a doctor's surgery? That time, instead of just, we're back to just do it. No. Take time to actually sort of think, and it might mean a smaller building, it might mean a different building, it might mean spaces that are less well defined, to actually allow for that flexibility. And again, what we're trying to do is build, from my understanding, that with government, is to build in terms that is resilient. So for the unexpected, for things that we can't anticipate, how would we design that? And we're back to Pierre Vassenar's advice about actually keeping it loose fit. But how does that then, here in Northern Ireland, we've got such prescriptive design guides for education, for example. We need to, again, for those in those sectors who compose and use those design guides and requirements, they need looked at.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. Yeah. Well, Alan, that's been fascinating, and it's been really enjoyable getting the comments coming through and talking about them. But thank you so much, Alan, for coming today and putting this presentation together, especially that you said you put it together especially for us. Thank you also to our sponsors, Atkins, Faithful & Gould, IES, NPS Group and Wilmot Dixon for their support. And if anyone could take a few seconds and answer the feedback question on the screen, that'd be very much appreciated. And then just a reminder that all the webinars over this 2-week period, we're in week 2 now, are being recorded and will be loaded onto the Spaces YouTube channel. Delegates and Spaces members will be sent a link at the end of the conference. The recordings are only available to delegates and Spaces members. But thanks again for joining us. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you very much, Helen. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay.
Thanks, Fiona.
Thank you very much, Alan.
Bye-bye.
Sure.
Bye.